Faith, Love, and Therapy, a podcast to encourage and inspire. I'm your host, Jamie Johnson, a clinical therapist working in the field of mental health for the last 10 years. I believe this podcast is God-inspired and will be God-led. Thank you for joining me as we peel back the layers of mental health from a faith perspective. You can connect with me on Instagram if you'd like, Faith, Love, and Therapy Podcast on Instagram. I hope to see you there. Also, if you have any questions or just want to have a conversation, you can email me at faithlovetherapy@gmail.com. I look forward to speaking with you and seeing you on the gram. Hopefully you got a little bit from the last episode on anger. We're going to continue that, not the discussion of anger, but a little bit of some of the emotions that tend to affect our mindset and our focus, and that if not addressed or processed in a healthy way, can have adverse effects. And so this particular episode, I want to touch on grief a little bit. And this one tends to be a hard topic for a lot of people. And even for me, for a while, grief was difficult in my career, just working with clients that were grieving, because we have a desire to fix and to mend and to heal and to make better. And one thing about grief is that everyone will experience it on some level. But the other part of it is that there isn't a roadmap to grief, to the process of grief. While there are widely known stages of grief that many people know, Kubler-Ross is known for in the counseling field as one of the greats in regard to the stages of grief, denial, all of those good things. But I don't want to go necessarily through the stages of grief. I just want to go through some of the impact and not really processing that. The stages of grief are very fluid, and you can jump all over the place. So there's no set way to grieve. There's no set process for grieving. I tell clients all the time that they may feel fine, and then something can trigger them 10 years later from a thought, a smell, a place that they visit. Grief is within us. We experience a lot of grief. And so just taking a deeper look at grief, this particular episode, and by definition, it's deep sorrow, especially that's caused by someone's death, especially, but not only. And that's one of the things I want us to understand is that first, it's something everyone will experience in their life. There's absolutely no escaping grief. We will not make it through this life without experiencing some level of grief in some way. 2, it happens with all types of loss. So death, end of a relationship, a divorce, changing homes, leaving a particular city, experiencing, a missed opportunity, the process of accepting failure. Life is not how you planned. All of those have a level of grief to them. There's an element of grief attached to all of those different transitions and more. So what I will say is that the grieving process is extremely necessary. So why do we rush through it? Why, if you just think about the people, following a funeral, or after someone has lost someone, or they've gone through a divorce, or they've, it's like, you'll be fine. Call me if you need me. God's going to do it. You'll be fine. Just, got to get back up, got to get back going. That's the thought process of just get back to it, get back to living. And I think because we often grieve with death, we feel or we equate it so closely to death as if we're dying too. And I think possibly because at times grief does feel like we're dying along with the person we lost, or along with the situation that came to an end. We feel like we're also losing, which we are, but we also feel like we're going through a death. So what I will say that I have noticed just in the field and working, with clients, why they want to rush through it is that, one, grief is inconvenient. And like I said, we want to get back to life. We have things to do, and grief tends to stop the things. I've talked often on the podcast about being versus doing. We want to get back to doing because grief is so inconvenient. It puts a pause on things. It makes us stop. It makes us, it makes things slow down. It makes it difficult to have the energy, have the enthusiasm, have the life that we had prior to the loss. There's something that shifts in us. And so that's an inconvenience, especially when we want to be able to do and accomplish things. Something else that I've noticed is that grief takes the cover off of all of the unprocessed pain. Everything that we have stored away and that we've been pretending that we're all fine and well, grief tends to pull the cover off every bit of that unprocessed stuff. And it exposes every sadness, every loss, every failure, every death. It exposes it all. And so I think people want to rush through it because they don't want that exposed. They don't want that Band-Aid taken off. They don't want to have to experience all the other feelings that are attached to that particular loss that in that season. And so I think people are also uncomfortable with their own sadness. And so we often rush to feel better. Like, I don't want to feel like this. I don't want to feel this. I hear that all the time. I don't want to feel this. And if you have been my client before, you'll hear me say, well, you're going to feel it, because there's no way for me to remove that from you. And I would never try to remove your feeling, because it's going to it's going to be the part of you that you need to feel. It's the stuff that you need to feel. And, going to therapy doesn't remove a feeling. It helps you move through a feeling. But I have noticed sadness makes people uncomfortable. And so we want to rush through it. And they're uncomfortable because there's so much grief that's already in us. And we also want to avoid that as well. But, I'd like to take a view on, like, what can grief teach us? How can grief be useful? And I know, most people listening are like, I don't want to hear that. But know that if this is something that everyone is going to experience in their life multiple times in different ways, leading up to the eventual loss of their own life, I mean, this world, if it's not going to teach you anything, it's going to teach you how to lose things, how to work through loss. And that's incredibly important. And so what I'll say, grief can teach us if we allow it to. One, spiritually, God will use grief to draw you closer to him. We try to avoid the feelings that are associated with grief because we feel weak and we feel overwhelmed and we feel consumed by it. But Jesus understands every emotion. He understands our grief, our sadness, our fear, our anxiety. And so when we are weak, he is strong. And so in those moments where we don't want to sit with grief or we don't want to sit with this sad emotion, it's not that we're going to sit with it by ourselves, but it's the opportunity for it to allow Christ to embrace us in that moment and to comfort us and to provide a healing and to walk with us through this particular journey. So allowing, spiritually, grief allows you to draw closer to the Father if you allow him to. He'll do the drawing, but if you give the space to sit with the Father, grief is an area where God shows up in so many different ways. God will show up. Another thing that I would say that how grief is useful is that we begin to see and value life differently. I don't know, just with this season of the pandemic and we're coming out of, but if we really took a moment to sit with how many people died, whether we knew them or not, in the last 2.5, almost 3 years to this virus, that's a lot of grief. And my hope and my desire is that people are seeing the blessing that life is and being able to view it differently as what do I want to do with this life? Because, every day I'm hearing about someone younger and younger passing away. There's no guaranteed time, right? And this episode is not to make you sad. It's to make you reflect, to understand that every day is precious. And so how do I value that life? How do I, walk through the day in a space of thanks and gratitude and enthusiasm, even when things are difficult? I think I've talked about before kind of nature walks with God, but just being able to be out in nature and see God do what he does. There are some times where I'm driving home across the bridge and I'm like, and I see the sunset and I'm like, God, like, you showing out tonight. Like, just moments like that, like, because the sunset is amazing to me. Or I'll see, people know that I like gardening, or I see something growing. I'm like, look at God. I say that a lot because I enjoy that. I enjoy growth. I enjoy, newness. But I can also see the power of God in the darkness, and the power of God in the quiet time, the power of God in a storm, the power of God in death. Like, we've lost people at our church, and, some things have hit, me a little harder, especially when you pray, and you're in that moment of grief and you're praying, you're thinking, and believing that God is going to do something. He's going to do something mighty. He's going to bring that person through. And he decides to bring that person through, but on the other side, he decides that that person's time here on earth is complete, and he has work for them elsewhere. He's going to heal them on the other side. And sometimes we have to sit with that. We have to sit with the fact that we prayed and we believed that God was going to do something. That's also a level of grief, to be able to say, God, this one is heavy because I thought something else. Like, I was praying and I was hoping for something else. I believed that it would be different. And so my heart is heavy. And in those moments, God still comforts us, even though we wanted him to do something completely different than what he did. But being able to see all the experiences that we've been through over the last 2.5 to 3 years, all of the life that's been lost, I won't even say lost, but we've lost it, that people that have passed away, how are we now valuing the days that we have, the years that we have ahead? And so grief, if we allow ourselves to truly process grief, we'll start to look at life differently. We'll start to see the value in life in ways that we never saw it before. And so often we can miss God and the experiences because we're so consumed with the responsibilities of this world. Yes, we have responsibilities, y'all. We have to, get things done. We have to work, but we also have to live, and we also have to give thanks for the life that we have and the relationships that we have and the family and the, we're not created to do this life alone. So to just have a goal of being successful, or just have the goal of like going to college, or these are pieces of a bigger picture, and to be able to reflect and see the value in it all is important. Another thing that I would say is that grief allows us to understand and become comfortable with our limitations. Many of us, and I jokingly thought, not jokingly, because I believe this, like sometimes we say Philippians 4:13, which is, I can do all things through Christ that strengthens me. And sometimes I think we really get stuck on the I can do all things, and it's just kind of that. But the blessing is in the through Christ part, that we are so limited in our physical, our human ability, and that we are empowered, we are strengthened by Christ. And so in moments of grief where we feel the weakest, he is able to empower us to do so much. And so when we are comfortable with processing grief, it points us in the direction of our limitations. And if we allow ourselves to be honest, our limitations will point us to Christ, because the only way that we're able to do any of the things that we do is because Christ allows us. He has empowered us to do it. He has given it to us to do. So allow yourself to process grief. Another thing that I think a benefit of allowing ourselves to grieve is that it reinforces the importance of our relationship with God and what we do for the kingdom. All of these things will pass away. Everything that we see before us, it will pass away. Everything we are, that we acquire in this life will be left when this life is done, at whatever point that is. If that's when you're 90, if that's when you're 105, if that's when you're 70, whenever this life is done for us, we're going to leave the things that we've acquired here. And so if you think about that, let that reinforce the importance, one, of your relationship with God, but two, of your work here to build the kingdom. Because if we're building things and it's quicksand and it's all things that will pass away, and we're not thinking about what will last, because only what we do for Christ will last, right? If we're not doing those things, then we're going to get stuck in a rut of the being versus doing. One of the other things, and probably the last thing I'll say in regards to the benefit or what grief can teach us, is the releasing and processing pain. And so if we're not processing pain, if if we are not releasing and moving through and allowing ourselves to deal with the pain that we experience in life, I guarantee it will process you. It will take control and it will guide you. In the last episode, we talked about envy and resentment and anger. Some of those things come from a lot of those things come from unprocessed pain. Unprocessed pain, which we don't want to touch. And so remember that feelings do not die. Feelings, we often say, I'm not thinking about that. I don't care. Feelings do not die, y'all. Feelings are seeds. They are always seeds. See a feeling as a seed. And so you do have a say in what they produce. If you allow yourself to really begin to cultivate and to work through some things, it will produce different fruit. It won't produce resentment and anger and fear and anxiety. It will begin to produce healthier responses. It'll produce spiritually mature people. Beginning to process your feelings allows you to become greater in your ability to work with people, greater in your ability to serve God, greater in your ability to have phenomenal relationships, greater in your ability to work through storms, to manage the hard parts of life, to surrender those things, all of those things to God. We have to be honest about our pain and processing all of these things so that we are getting to a place of spiritual maturity where God can do a work that's greater than anything that we could ever imagine. So I want you to consider the following in your journal. Remember, you can get your Faith, Love, and Therapy journals on Amazon. You can type in the title. You can also put in my name, and it's a good starter journal to just begin putting your feelings down on paper. Faith, Love, and Therapy on Amazon.com. So I want you to consider these 2 questions in your journal. Or like 3. 1, what have I buried because it's too painful for me to touch? What have I buried? Think of feelings as seeds. What have I buried because it's too painful to touch? I can almost guarantee you that you're grieving it. But what have you buried that is too painful to touch? How has that changed you, shaped you, hindered you in any way? How has the thing that you've buried, or things, it could be more than one, how has it shaped you? How has it changed you? How has it hindered you? I want you to write that. I want you to, write that question out, write the question out, sit with it, and really put your thoughts down. The second thing I want you to do, and you don't have to do it in this order, but the second thing I want you to do is then really write out every loss. And I know y'all don't want to hear me say that, but write out every loss that you've experienced, every death, every lost job, every lost friendship, every lost romantic relationship, every failure, every loss. I want you to write it down. And I want you to be honest after you write them down. I want you to be honest about how you feel about each one of those. I don't want you to rush this process. And I don't want you to rush it because 1, it can become overwhelming, but 2, we then again start to bury things when we're rushing through it. If you have to take one by one, if this takes you the rest of this year, let it take you the rest of this year and process through this pain and allow yourself to grieve. And when you are grieving, ask God to meet you in the space of your grief. Ask God to sit with you as you are working through every bit of this loss, every bit of this pain, because He's going to show you some things about yourself. He's going to show you some things about every situation, every perceived loss, every actual loss. He's going to show you. And so take your time with Him and allow Him to show you who you are and what grief has uncovered in your life. So I hope this is helpful. Really take some time to work through this particular issue, guys, because it is one of the things that comes into my office on a regular basis, and people don't realize it's grief. Some people come with a lot of other emotions, and I finally get to the place of like, it sounds like you are grieving this, and the tears and the floodgate, because they don't realize in the beginning that it's grief. But grief is there, and we need to take a deeper look at it. So I hope this episode was helpful. And I hope to see you next time on another episode of Faith, Love, and Therapy. Take care of yourself.